This is the Fatty Joe Show, coming to you from Casa de Carrie, deep in the forests of Nutmeggerville. This show is dedicated to exploring pathways to better health from a holistic perspective. In each episode, we will explore such topics as nutrition, mental and emotional health, fitness, and more. I'm Yogi, your host, and I became interested in studying health after conventional health dogma became damaging and led me to become massively overweight. Against modern convention, I went on a keto lifestyle and I lost over 300 pounds and gained a level of control on my personal health that I never had before. Now I'm on a journey to find out what is myth and what is truth in the ever convoluted world of what is considered healthy. Come join me on a journey of discovery as I look for a path to improve total health. If you'd like to support the show, head over to patreon.com/thefattyjoeshow or patreon.com/carriebrown. If you want to check out all of our social media links and recipes, head to carriebrown.com. Don't forget to leave a comment, like, and subscribe to the show.
Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Fatty Joe Show. I am really honored today to have a man that I got to meet at Keto Fest in 2019 or 2018, 18 or 19. And I can't remember at this point, but we have the Sodfather himself, Peter Ballerstedt, on the show. And we're going to talk about supply chains, raising cattle, farming, and sourcing your food, as well as a number of other topics, whatever we get into as we go. So I'm going to bring him on right now, and let's introduce Peter. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, Yogi. Thank you so much for the invitation. Thanks for your podcast. My name's Peter Ballerstedt. I've been pursuing what I'm training myself to call a therapeutic carbohydrate restriction type diet. And I've been following that since 2007. Nice. The line is that in 2007, I realized I was a 51-year-old balding, obese, pre-diabetic. And today I'm just balding. So while the diet's powerful, it's not magic, right?
Right.
But I'm trained in agriculture, specifically in agronomy, specifically in forage agronomy, and I have a minor in ruminant nutrition, so we can unpack all of that. But what that basically means is I was trained to support people in the beef and dairy and small ruminant like sheep and goats community in terms of pasture, hay, silage production, utilization. And then those two started getting combined because I'd hear, one, by reading Gary Taubes, when Good Calories, Bad Calories came out, I became somewhat angry at first because these people that I'd been trained to serve had been vilified as being a health hazard and a menace. And then I became more and more aware of just how wrong the environmental messaging was about the impact of livestock agriculture in general and ruminant animal agriculture in particular. And then I would hear things within my new human nutrition tribe that people would say things, and I was like, hey, you might want to check out these sources before you repeat that. And so now I kind of find myself standing between these different communities and trying to introduce them to each other because I'm convinced we have a lot to learn from each other.
Yeah. And, typically in the US, we tend to throw the baby out with the bathwater when we find some sort of new shiny toy. So it prevents us from learning, because we did some great things with modern agriculture, but we threw away a lot of the old things that would have benefited us. And now I think a lot of people are pushing toward a more older agriculture with throwing away some of the modern things that would benefit the older agriculture.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
I think that's right. Hmm.
um, we were talking a little bit earlier about supply chains, and for the listeners who don't know, I used to be a trucker, so I got to see some of this stuff. But we have recently had shortages in meat and toilet paper and all kinds of things. And it's not necessarily we have a short supply of the stuff, but as you were saying before we got on the air, it's actually an issue of getting the supplies to the marketplaces for the people and with the industrial area. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. If you think about the restaurant or institutional sort of service, um, they don't really need this. They need a different packaging. The packaging requires different processing. So for the very same product, so the dairy farmer produces milk, for example. When it gets packaged to support the restaurant or institutional trade, you don't put it in half gallons or pints or whatever. You put it in something that's more appropriate to the intended customer. In any case, those systems are already set up so that farmers sell to packaging, sometimes in contract, but it's all set up and it doesn't transfer. You can't take, flip a switch and have the same processor automatically begin packaging for home consumption. And so, it's not that all of a sudden we had a shortage of toilet paper. It's all of a sudden we had more people needing toilet paper at home, which was supplied by a different market chain or distribution chain than it had been previously. And it didn't transition seamlessly, let's put it that way. And at the same time, we've had a certain philosophy of just in time delivery, which you would have been familiar with in that trade. And all it takes is a hiccup somewhere along the way. And this was a heck of a hiccup. And just in time becomes on the edge of, shortage. And then we had these ripples. So I guess one of the messages that we should keep in mind, regardless of what we're talking about, is these systems are a lot more complex than many, many people are familiar with, which makes it really susceptible to problems when only a small number of people begin to say, this is what we're going to do, because they don't have the knowledge of all the implications and ramifications of their decisions.
Let's maybe go in and highlight that as an example real quick. Let's talk about one of the things that we've seen a lot on the news recently and on is the milk process, like you were talking about, and how a lot of dairy farmers are dumping milk out because they can't sell because they're under contract to go to institutions or restaurants and they can't switch over. So let's follow that process. What are some of the maybe the regulations that they have to the hoops that they have to jump through? Why couldn't they just sell it directly to the consumer that is around who maybe want to take their own container up and get it filled?
Yeah, so there's different states have different regulations, or different regions have different regulations regarding direct to consumer sales. So that's one thing. Number two is, farmers, the dairy industry is a regional one. So you can think of things just like a watershed. You have a milk shed, not the physical building, but where milk produced in that region goes. And in some regions, it primarily goes to manufacturing, cheese production, dry powder production, those sorts of products made from milk. So it's not fluid milk. And that milk has a different regulatory structure to it than does the fluid milk sale. So that's another difference. And then if you have on top of that this difference between the intended market for those products, that's yet another problem. And so dairy farmers in some regions are already under significant pressure because of what it costs them to produce milk versus what they can sell it for. And that's a significant problem. A lot of farms, it's a question whether you want the public coming on the farm. There's such a thing as biosecurity. And so there's a lot of potential for transmission of animal diseases by the public coming in, not observing proper sanitation, et cetera, Plus, not everyone really, how shall we say it, has the personality that wants to see large numbers of people that they don't know coming onto their farm and dealing with them. So there's lots of issues, but those would probably pretty well highlight the ones that get in the way immediately. And when you're used to shipping milk twice a day in 1,000-gallon containers, that is the truck that comes and picks it up and takes it away. Think about what it would take to replace that from people coming to buy. And it's just it's not the solution to the big problem, let's say.
As you were talking about the hazmat factor, the potential disease transmission, I can remember when I was driving and I'd go pick up some eggs or some, because I ran a refrigerated truck, and I'd go pick up some eggs or some chickens, and I wouldn't be allowed outside of my truck. When they would come in, they would sterilize the outside of my truck, and people don't realize that there's all these different steps just even for the truck driver to come and pick up an animal product like meat or seafood or dairy. That there's a process there, and when you have something where systems shut down like COVID does, it may affect those processes of the truckers being able to get there to even pick up the supplies. So
yeah,
what would you see as some potential solutions? Because there's that old axiom of don't put all your eggs in one basket, which seems to be a lot of what current day farmers do. They rely on one type of product to bring to the market, whether it be corn or soybeans or one type of cattle. They tendency to rely, and not necessarily through their fault, it's also because of regulations and things, they rely on one source to sell their products to. So whether it's legal, changing administration policies, or how to set up a farm, what are some solutions that you would see to help stabilize the chain of supply so that there's other alternatives, so that if one goes down, they have a backup or they have another one that they can rely on?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. One initial response is that the current system, which if we take cattle, you've got cattle in every state. You clearly have some states that produce more than others, etc. But when you think of how we move product from production to consumption, we're no longer dependent on a single region, right? So Iowa just recently had essentially sustained hurricane force winds that created a huge problem for them. Well, fortunately, the people there aren't facing famine as a result of crop failure, right? Now, it's a hardship. There's going to be problems. It looks horrible. I have friends that live and work there. But one of the dangers of people getting too wedded to some of these romantic notions of, the good old days, is that you lose track of things like we do have improved food security today because of modern production and distribution systems. We're not, one hailstorm away from famine, or one, plant disease like the Irish in the 1840s. So that's one thing. Number two is, yes, we see all kinds of reasons for a reintegration of agriculture. We've gone through a period where people have specialized, starting with the separation of plant, commodity crops and livestock. That happened beginning, I'd say in the 80s, maybe late 70s, and that trend accelerated. But now we're seeing evidence that says, no, we now need to bring back livestock into cropping systems, specifically ruminants. And so we're seeing this interest in things called, cover cropping is one thing, but an interest in looking at soil health. And that by having the soil covered with a growing root and a growing cover on the soil for as long a period of the year as that location permits, and then putting a grazing animal on that periodically, we actually can see some remarkable benefits in soil health. And that soil health then means improvement in water quality. It means carbon sequestration. It means keeping nutrients in that soil system as opposed to having them leach or run off, as well as more production. So those are things that I would see. We need better rotations in many areas than we currently have in the cropping systems, so that we don't just go corn on corn on corn on corn. I was told by one person in northern Alberta that we have to remind people that canola snow is not a rotation. For reasons that I was taught when I went through undergraduate school back in the early 80s. I mean, this is not new. We've known these things, but we've forgotten them.
Well, the monocropping systems, isn't that one of the things that are attributed to the Dust Bowl back in the day, of drying up the soil, getting rid of the grazing animals, moving them off, and decreasing the topsoil so it allowed the dust to pick up? I mean, that's something I was taught, but
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that happened was we had government trying to favor the U.S. becoming the wheat supplier. So Russia had been the world's wheat supplier. World War I disrupted that. And then there was an interest by various people to see the U.S. become the world's wheat supplier. And so through a number of programs, in many ways, they were, at heart, they were good, but in implementation, they weren't. And so you had then this, this favoring of plowing up the shortgrass prairies. And especially in that region of southeastern Colorado, northeastern, what would that be? New Mexico, the panhandle regions of Texas and Oklahoma, Kansas, southwest Kansas. Those areas were a biome that is naturally called shortgrass prairie. And it was something that had evolved over millennia to survive within that sort of climactic region. Well, you had people come in, they turned the ground, as one person said, wrong side up, right? So the roots were sticking up out of the ground. But they started in a period of unusual rainfall. So it was unusually wet. And so they came and turned it. Well, that does a lot of things. And the wheat produced abundantly. And so people thought, this is great. We can just do this forever. And then what happened was they entered a period of drought. And so they had a crop failure. Well, then they replanted, but they didn't replant without working the ground again. And so they pounded the ground while they had a series of crop failures, and then there was nothing left to hold the ground in place, the soil in place. And as soon as the wind started, which it always did, they had this. But we see that happening today still to an extent, and it's in areas. I had to get educated because that's where I thought of the Dust Bowl. But the great book called The Worst Hard Times talks about that region and that experience. But South Dakota and North Dakota, we still experience wind erosion, significant amount. I got to see something when I got to attend I flew into Fargo and drove to Bismarck. Sorry, that's not right. Must have been South Dakota. So where would I have? It doesn't matter. As I was driving along, it was January, and so most of the snow had been removed from the road, but you could still see it in the ditch. And some of the snow was quite dark. And for a while I thought, is that stuff they've, like cinders off the highway? And then I was like, no, there's patterns to it. And then I realized that it was darkest next to the fields that didn't have grass on them. And so then I was introduced to a term called snert, which is snow and dirt. And that's, the evidence of this wind erosion during the wintertime from fields that don't have sufficient cover. And one of the things that I learned on that trip was that a lot of work was done in the 60s and 70s, maybe even a little earlier, to map the soils of the United States. So today, if you own a piece of property, excuse me, you can go online and find maps of your property and what the soil types are and what their use is and potential yield is. And so today, they can go back to those same places because they've recorded where they characterize the soils. And this was North Dakota. In North Dakota, you can find the same area. So we talk about the A horizon is at the top, and then there's a B horizon, and then the C horizon is sort of like below that is bedrock. And today, that same soil, the soil surface is 18 inches closer to the sea horizon than it was in the 60s when that soil was first characterized. We've lost 18 inches of that topsoil from those fields. And if you look, when you drive through that territory, when farmers in Connecticut, when they cleared fields, they built stone walls, right? Well, your fields were too big in North Dakota to do that. So they just made piles of rocks and then farmed around the piles. And today you can see those piles on pillars of soil with the soil surface that they're farming now, 18 inches or so below the surface that those stones were protecting all these years. So these same things are going on now. At the same time, when the first settlers arrived, they only knew how to do what they knew how to do. You know, when those first Europeans came across the prairie, they referred to it as the Great American Desert because there were no trees. And that's all. I mean, they're coming from Europe. They're coming from Eastern US where they're used to seeing trees. And now to be out where for days, you know, essentially no trees, it's a desert. Well, no, it's not a desert. It's a grassland. You're just not used to it. And all they brought with them was the farming knowledge that they had and the equipment that they had and the unadapted varieties, and they weren't using fertilizer to replace the crops that they were pulling off and all of that kind of thing going on. And so their impact, we've made a lot of progress since then, but we've got a lot to go.
And it's very analogous to what happened in California as far as one of the reasons why the wildfires go so bad. I was reading a book ways back where they were taking their techniques that they knew from back east to control fire zones in California. But what they didn't realize is when they were trying to clear off brush, that brush actually had a natural chemical that formed a fire break. It was a natural fire retardant chemical. And when they got rid of a lot of the natural brush in favor for imported plants and things like that, they actually created more potential for raging fires. It was one of the factors.
Yeah, sure. Along with suppressing a fire means nature will burn it at some point. You know, you just accumulate enough fuel and she'll provide the spark, as well as people building in the red zones where it makes it impossible to manage fire in the way people were used to before, as well as, you know, you're in an ecology that's dependent on fire periodically coming through. And it turns out that essentially North America was a land that was managed with fire by the people that lived here prior to European settlement.
Yeah, the book I was reading, the guy that was clearing he was a forest service agent, I think in the I want to say 1910s, and he's trying to clear out this brush, and he's got Native Americans working for him. One of the old natives comes up to him and goes, "No, don't take that away. You want that there." Like,
I was just, I forget where I came across this, but I was just watching something. I think it was about the Colorado wildfires, because again, we have this expansion of suburbia, and that's a problem. And there have been some tragedies where a large number of wildland crews found themselves where they shouldn't have been doing what they shouldn't have been doing, and lives were lost. And one of the speakers said that there are Native American wildland fire crews, and they've never had fatalities on those crews. Now, I don't know, I'm taking his word for it. What he says is that his comment was they know how to read fire, they know when to fight it and when to let it go. And so as a result, they haven't put themselves in the path of, well, they're putting themselves in the path of harm when you fight fire, but they seem to have a knowledge sort of internalized that hasn't yet been transferred into other crews. And that's something that has to happen, because again, you just have to drive around the front slope of Colorado to recognize what the problem is, right?
Yeah, and onto the back, we'll bring it back to the soil health. One of the things that I've been reading lately, just recently there was an article about regenerative farmers actually reverting for lack of a better term, de-desertifying the ground, of going in and bringing the cattle through, and it going from a desert area with loose soil to over a period of a few years actually holding water, retaining water, and producing higher yields of vegetation, and not being a desert anymore in that area.
Yeah, I urge caution with some of that. One is because desert has a specific definition, and
Yeah.
there's lots of causes for land becoming a desert, some of which has to do with climate cycles and which way the wind blows and all of that kind of thing. Water, if you have water, you can overcome a lot of problems. And if you don't, it's really difficult to overcome those problems. That all being said, there's no doubt that grazing mismanagement can be tremendously harmful to the environment. And at the same time, proper grazing management can yield a number of benefits. So all of that being said, in addition, anything that you can do to improve the organic matter content in the soil will increase the amount of water that soil can hold. And I think the figure is something like for every 1% increase in soil organic matter content, you can hold an additional acre inch of water. Now, an acre inch of water is over 27,000 gallons. So, and then there are some things in addition, like if we can improve the water stable structure of a soil, which happens when we increase organic matter, et cetera, then we can increase the infiltration. If we can maintain a plant cover on the soil, then we can increase infiltration and reduce runoff. So more water enters and more water is held within the soil to support plant growth. So all those things are well-established facts. Again, we've known them for a very long time. One of the problems that you said it earlier, and I forget whether it was before or after we started, but we get enamored with the new shiny toy. Yeah. And I think we get enamored with the new shiny title as well. I've been around this for a while. I graduated in 1986 and joined a faculty at a university in 86. And I've seen things become buzzwords. Those buzzwords then generated funding to support them. That funding typically comes at the expense of previously existing work. And then, then we do that for a while, and now there's a new buzzword, and there's new funding, and et cetera, et cetera. It's really interesting to go into your land-grant university library. So in Oregon, it would be Oregon State. In Connecticut, it would be in Storrs, Connecticut, in Yukon, and just troll through the shelves and read the books that were published in the interwar years, World War I, World War II. So we're talking 1920, 1930. And then through the 40s, we had a dramatic change. Coming out of World War II, we now had a new reality where a lot of the young people that had grown up on farms had experienced a reality somewhere else. And they weren't all that anxious to go back, but you still needed labor to farm in the way that people were used to farming in those days. And there were now new techniques and new things. A lot of people went into university to do research, or they went into extension to spread that research back to the farm, but they came from farm roots originally. GI Bill helped them. So it's fascinating for me, at least, to read those books and then kind of say, well, a lot of this is not so new. For a number of reasons, there have been new tools that have come across that solved problems that they were trying to solve and maybe not doing so well with. But at the same time, we've got a reality in the United States where something like less than, trying to get this, so we've got we've got more people today sorry, let me redo that.
Yes, sir.
No, it's fine. I'm thinking out loud, and it's not always seamless.
I know the feeling.
The number of people today in the United States who make their living from farming is something less than 250,000. Now, if you look at the specifics, there's about 2 million people listed as primary operators of farms in the United States today. But when you drill into those numbers, you find again that 70% of those make less than $25,000 a year from their farm. Now, I'm all for whatever people are doing, and I have information that I think is useful to them, and I want to support them in what they're doing because I'm convinced it's important and good. But they're not feeding the population, let alone all of the food that's exported, which is a good thing, and the income that generates to our economy, which is a good thing. We live in a country where we no longer talk about things that used to be addressed as primary industries. In other words, these are industries that generate new wealth. and we now live where people act like, oh, okay, we can just continually, I don't know, service economy run the United States. And it's like, well, it's important. I'm all for it. But I'm not sure that you can support the entire economy off of that kind of industry. So agriculture gets a bad name. Part of my mission is to sort of say, well, you might want to check yourself on that one. And number two is to really say, look, we know enough now to say that all of agriculture and forestry is a bigger sink for anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions than what they produce. They are a net sink. We know that now. We should no longer have that conversation. We know enough now to say that ruminant animal agriculture, whatever its greenhouse gas emissions are, and they're somewhere around 2% of total, those are primarily looking at methane emissions from cattle, and that methane is actually part of a carbon cycle. Just like rain comes from water vapor down to the soil surface and then ultimately becomes water vapor again that comes back as rain, and we have that cycle going on. We have a similar cycle with carbon. And so the methane is going to be oxidized back to CO2 within about 10 years. And then that CO2 is going to be fixed via photosynthesis. And then the cow's going to eat that plant again. And then you've got this cycling taking place. Well, the public conversation has been very different than what the science would say it should be. And then on top of that, we've had this narrative that says, oh, you are fat and have heart disease because you eat too much red meat. And I would suggest, no, I'm sorry, that's what I refer to as male bovine fecal matter. It's just, I know where you got that idea, but I don't think you understand how that idea is not well founded in the science. And so what we need to get people more aware of is, if you are part of that 90% of adult Americans that don't enjoy optimal metabolic health, if you're that there's a lifestyle intervention that you should be aware of, and you should know that you can try it and it won't make you sicker. It might actually make you better. I think the one thing that I like to point out to people, well, one of the many things I like to point out to people, is if the average type 2 diabetic in America could eliminate their medication use, they would reduce their carbon footprint 29% more than if they went from a meat heavy to a vegan diet. Now, what would that, if there were only some way that you could do that? What would and could you live? Could you sustain yourself on such a drastic diet? Could you maintain that for any period? Yeah, of course you can.
Yeah.
And what's the evidence of people sustaining themselves on a vegan diet? What's the evidence of the environmental impact of a vegan diet? And we have that. We have those estimates.
Yeah, I recommend to people a lot to read the Vegetarian Myth. In that book, I forgot the author's name, but she really illustrates Lierre Keith. Yeah, she really illustrates a lot of those points. With supporting agriculture, what could our average consumer do? And we were talking earlier off air about the fact that people are pressured to get the highest form of beef out there that they, sometimes that's out of their price range. And if they think they can't do it, then, just go back to the garbage or that type of thing, which is, to me, such flawed logic. But what can an average person do of an average income that can support the industry as well as help their health?
So one of my many lines is, when you improve your own health, you are improving the world. So the number one focus is to find the path that fits your income, your circumstances, your background, your personal preferences, whatever that is. We have more information available to us today than we ever had before. That comes with some minuses, but it gives us the chance to be our own gatekeeper. So, I recommend books like, all of Gary Taubes's books. The Case Against Sugar is one that I've been recommending mostly lately. Why We Get Fat and What to Do About It is another one. But for the really geeky, Good Calories, Bad Calories, yes, I have it in Audible, Kindle, and hard copy. In fact, I've given them away at conferences. And then Big Fat Surprise is another one. Nina Teicholz. Ben Bickman's latest book is one that I recommend, Why We Get Sick, which just focuses on this issue of metabolic illness, hyperinsulinemia, insulin resistance. We need to internalize this idea that I'm firmly convinced that virtually every chronic illness you can name now has at least a plausible linkage to insulin resistance, hyperinsulinemia. That's good enough for this agronomist. And part of my training is to recognize that until you address the limiting factor, you can't know anything about all the other possible factors. You need to have that mindset. And so, again, getting people to recognize what they have to do. You need to find a lifestyle intervention that's going to improve your insulin sensitivity, etc. So whatever that is. Now, when you go to the store to buy, one, don't create financial hardship on yourself, because that's stress inducing and that has a problem. So buy what you can afford and buy it with confidence. Because I'm here to say that the meat that we can buy in the Piggly Wiggly or the Kroger or the Safeway or the Walmart is safe and healthful. Okay, I understand that there's another narrative that's prevalent within our own tribe, but I, again, to them say, more, what is your specific concern? And I've learned over the years that when we can get to that level of granularity and trace it out, we find that there's no there. So now I'm back to, okay, if you are buying the 80-20 hamburger at your local store and buying the eggs that you used to pick up and deliver on loss leader sale, because they tend to be relatively inexpensive, that's a really good diet for someone who needs to improve their insulin sensitivity. And so those sorts of things. Then, okay, you know what they say about there's nothing worse than a reformed smoker. When we have the personal experience, first of all, we never know who's watching. And most of us really would rather watch a sermon than listen to one. And so that I've seen that happen before with people who improve their own health, and then people in their community say, what are you doing? What, man, you've lost. First of all, they're concerned that they have cancer, right? Are you okay? You've lost so much weight. It's funny, these humans. So we do that. We influence people. I think it's David Feldman that talks about the pivotal patient. I think Gary Taubes' next book, talking about how physicians came to change their worldview. Part of that had to do with patients that they saw. So maybe we can influence people that way. And just grow where you're planted, right? Yeah. Wherever you are, you can affect change. Not all of us can be Gary Taubes' or Yogis with best-selling podcasts or whatever. But you never know. Give it time. But we can all influence ourselves, our families, our communities, and then one of the things I'm wrestling with is, I have personal experience within the recovery community, and one of the things that happened over the years is those communities found a way to raise the bottom. So at first, these were the really down and out people that kind of got things rolling. But as they went along, they found a way to reach people maybe 20 years sooner than their entry point. Right. So is there a way that we can show people that, look, you don't have to start the progressive amputation route for diabetes? Is there a way that we can show people that, 10 years before they're diagnosed with diabetes, there's something that they can see that to show them that this is a coming thing, and gain sort of acceptance that way? And a lot of that's going to be against current narrative, but I've been at this long enough to see some remarkable changes in the relatively short time that I've been in this community. So those are sorts of things I would suggest. And if in time people are located in a way and they have the means where they can find farmers that they can buy directly from, by all means do that. I'm all for that kind of thing, but I don't want that to happen at the expense of people thinking that unless it can be all the label claims, then I shouldn't even try, and I'll just that's just rationalization and justification for not taking those initial first steps.
Yeah, when I was when I was first getting into keto and I'd lost a lot of weight, I was at home with my family. We went to a local Sprouts to go get some food. It's a natural grocery store, kind of like a lower cost Whole Foods. When I was there, there was one other woman teaching another woman how to do keto, and she's grabbing all the supplements from Primal and all these things and you need to have this and this bone broth over here. And the lady who was pushing the cart, who was trying to go into keto, was like, I can't afford all this. Like, I can't eat there. And I've seen that a lot with the truckers that I've worked with. And if your diet isn't sustainable, then it's not going to work for you. And if it's not financially sustainable, it's not going to work for you.
Exactly.
And a lot of times it's about the better choice and not the best choice.
That's life.
Yeah.
right?
And
I mean,
so, yeah,
cost benefit. We're not really good at that, as we
no,
see. But and again, I see I don't mean to harp on it, but I see a lot of narrative that says that this is a better choice. That when I dig into it, I'm not sure what that's based on, other than people's belief systems, and that's valid to a degree, but it certainly shouldn't be the basis for what we tell people. Um, if there's no sort of grounding in objective evidence, I mean, that's how we get dietary guidelines that are mostly driven by or largely influenced by Seventh-day Adventism.
yeah.
And, so those things, yeah.
I fell into that trap too. I went the vegetarian route. I tried vegan for a while, and
Ooh,
it really did not work for me. And my thing is, if you have to supplement and take a supplement to make your diet work, then it may not be a good diet. If you're not
yeah.
getting all the nutrition that you need, because and you need to go and buy a B12 supplement because you can't get it in the food you're eating, that to me that's an issue.
Yeah, there's some things that I've learned in animal nutrition that when I start learning more about human nutrition, I just go, how do you not know this? Um, I've been giving talks here lately on when is protein not protein, and the we in human nutrition, when you look at a label or you look in food tables, when it says grams of protein per serving or whatever, that's crude protein. It's not true protein. And swine nutritionists haven't been paying attention to that for almost half a century now. So there's real differences, and part of this is driven by we've been so distracted, like you say, by the bright, shiny, nutritional epidemiology of chronic disease, preventative medicine, all those myths and what do you call it, the mirages. If you've driven, like the stuff at the far end of the highway at the horizon that really isn't. Here's another one for you, that when we confidently say that a gram of protein or carbohydrate has 4 calories per gram and that a gram of fat has 9, most people in human nutrition is certainly, popularly don't understand that that is an approximation. I mean, we're not talking about calories in, calories out. We're talking about how we estimate the caloric content. And that a gram of carbohydrate in one food can have a different energetic content than a gram of carbohydrate in another food. It's the same carbohydrate. And then different carbohydrates have different caloric contents. So all of this has been a necessary simplification, justified at certain levels, but you need to understand what the assumptions are and why those, okay, we get it over here, but now we have people making very confident assertions about, well, a calorie is a calorie. Well, no, it isn't. And you can get all your protein from plants, and no, you can't. And it goes on and on and on. At the simplest thing, I'm just fascinated by what physicians learn when they deal with real live free living human beings.
Yeah.
and so Ted Naiman, he talks about this. It's one of my things that I remember from him, that he had somebody come to him who is living in a tent. He's a metabolic mess. He goes to a secondhand store. He buys a used cast iron skillet. He's cooking on a butane stove. He goes to Safeway, which is our big chain out here in the Pacific Northwest. He buys the cheap 80/20, in the tube hamburger. He buys the lost leader eggs. He's cooking that on his butane stove, and within, I'll say a year, but I think it was less, he dumped 70 pounds of excess fat, not body weight, fat, and he normalized his blood panels. Okay, got off the medications he was on, and he was paying $6 a day for food and fuel. Right. So now tell me why I need to be buying the shopping cart full of supplements and all this other stuff, right? I don't see it.
Yeah. You know, the supplements have their place, in my opinion, and it's if you want to target for a specific issue that you're having, let's say digestive issues or something like that. But a lot of the supplements that I see on the market, one, the supplement industry is very low in regulation, so you may not actually be getting what you were thinking you're buying, you know.
And where are they being made?
Right. And well, I used to actually work for a supplement company, and they would actually talk about how the bulking powders for weightlifters, for doing powerlifting, that those same companies would manufacture steroids, and they would run the protein powder across the same belts as the steroids, because then when people get the protein powder, they get and I was like, wow, really? And then when I got into pro wrestling, guys were taking supplements that they were buying from GNC and popping dirty on drug tests.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And like we went to, I didn't get a chance to go, but a group of guys I knew went to Australia, and they had packed their supplements with them, and the at the airport their supplements were confiscated as drugs because they're like, you guys don't regulate this stuff. There could be anything in here.
Yeah. Well, so I guess your point, I'd say the same thing about pharmaceuticals. Obviously, there are places and times when pharmaceuticals would be appropriate. I'm also convinced that they're oversold and overused. And if that overuse and oversales were eliminated somehow, what would those industries look like? Right? Because how much of their budgets are funded by, right, people who don't need them?
Well, we live in a society these days too where, and it's not just these days, it's human nature to find the easy way out. We want, when we were hunters and gatherers, we would look sometimes at one animal and go, that could kill us, let's go for the rabbit. I mean, we did go after the bigger game, but oftentimes as a team of people, and we would take the mammoth and run it over a cliff so we didn't have to stand underneath it with a spear. We look for the easy way out, and the pills, whether they're supplements or whether they are pharmaceuticals or pharmaceutical grade supplements, they are the easy way out for a lot of us. We don't have to try and figure out our meals and balance things in our mind.
Yeah, and I think there's another bit to that too, and that's this deference to authority, right? So I've recently heard this, that experts should be on tap, not on top, right? We should have access to people who can tell us what we know and what we don't know. They should be honest and humble enough to be able to do that. And then we ought to have the ability to sort of sift that. And maybe we need to be trained how to do that as a society. That might be something good. But today, it seems to me like we have the modern day priesthood. Their vestments are the white coat, and then they have the artifacts like the little, what do they call the thing that the stethoscope, and that, and all that kind of stuff hanging around them. And so these are the new modern holy men. And so we go and, they've pronounced. And so we go, and some of these people aren't even practicing medicine. They just have doctor in front of their name. And so what is it about that triggers this, and we see it today. We don't like the unknown. Fear motivates us as a society. Right. And so all of those things are part of what people like yourself and myself and so many others we're now operating in this space, and that's why I train myself to say things like therapeutic carbohydrate reduction, right? Because it's saying something. It's saying that there are conditions which have been established as carbohydrate reduction producing positive results in. And we have now an extensive, and it avoids the diet wars, right?
Yeah.
And then another phrase, and I'm just ripping off Adele Height at this point, but we need to be focused on achieving adequate essential nutrition. I don't care what your dietary choices are to do that, but there's certain information you need to have in order to do that, regardless of your dietary choices. Now, I happen to be convinced that there are really only 3 dietary schools. You can be carnivore, you can be vegan, or you can be an omnivore. I'm rejecting vegetarian, because that's just trying to be an omnivore but feel good about it, right? So if you're eating animal source food of any kind, for whatever reason you've made your selections, great, cool, I'm fine with it. Okay, now some of your justifications we might be able to talk about, but we're back at the beginning stages of this relationship, right? So as long as you're eating sufficient animal source food of whatever choice you're making, then you have a chance of achieving adequate essential nutrition. But we have such a perverted conversation that we can have people who think that the RDA for protein is the target instead of the minimum. And we have such a perverted, polluted pool that we're swimming in when we talk about human nutrition, that we have people who think that a gram of protein from plant source is equal to a gram of protein from animal source food. And it's not a controversy that they're not in any way, shape, or form equivalent, yet we talk about them as if they are. And so it goes. So you could say that you can get if you can't get it from animal source food, you don't need it.
That the kind of knowledge would be a real game changer, wouldn't it?
Yeah. See what you did there. Very good. Very good.
Yeah, I as a vegetarian, I managed to get myself close to 600 pounds.
Mm.
And I got up a little bit higher when I just kind of gave up and was like, screw it. If I'm eating what everybody's telling me healthy and I'm still gaining weight, then
what were you eating as a vegetarian? Any animal source food?
I had mainly fish. I was eating a lot of fish. But Oreos are vegetarian.
No, of course they are. So are Fritos.
And
right?
so is French fries. And so is
and
then
I don't know, how big is your hand? Because I had to learn that a handful of nuts was not the amount I could physically hold. Oh, you mean it's like,
right.
It's only like 10 cashew? What?
Yeah.
No.
Well, that's another problem that people have, is because they've been told all the time to eat in moderation. But what is moderation? And is there really a moderation when you take a product that in a natural form has a bunch of other components to it and refine it down to a pure carbohydrate form, sugar, fructose, things like that? Is that now, can you eat that in moderation?
Right. And if you eat it and it influences ingestive behavior, right? So again, personal experience. For me, there's no moderate amount of ethyl alcohol that I can consume, right? I have an allergy to ethanol. It triggers a desire in me for more, among many other things, right? And so that thing in a normal temperate drinker that would say, no, I've had enough, I don't have that. And there are people who have a response to, as you say, refined or processed carbohydrates, but maybe even more, any kind of carbohydrate. Maybe if it comes in a fruit, it would trigger the same thing. We don't really know, but it does trigger ingestive behavior that is not what they would have followed had they not eaten it. So now what's moderate? What's a moderate amount of strychnine? What's a moderate amount of arsenic or lead or, aflatoxin or any other thing that you can? No, there's like none. And so if we have people who are themselves diabetic, then they have arguably achieved somehow an abnormal response to carbohydrate. And so maybe it's reasonable to now shift to this idea that none is the moderate amount for them.
Well, it's like you were talking about addicts. You're not going to tell an addict, just have a little bit of cocaine, you'll be okay.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, the same thing. And then, so what's balance, right? For some people, maybe, they can eat this without, but I'm not sure we've reached a point now with our population that it's clear that the vast majority of adult Americans are probably in that abnormal response to carbohydrate range. Maybe actually it's the normal response, but we could suss that out over time. The point is here and now, what are they going to do? And so balance, where did that come from? Who was it that sold us on the idea of combining fruits and vegetables? They used to be separate categories. Now they're one. Who was it that sold us on this idea that meat should be combined with other plant protein sources as if they're equivalent? How did all this happen? So then when somebody comes along and say, oh, well, I think balance is the key. Well, congratulations for uttering a platitude that's completely meaningless, right? You have no idea what you're grounding yourself on, or if you do, you're evil. And given that ignorance will make the assumption that you're not evil, then do you understand how poorly sourced that is and the implications for people that hear that bloviation?
Well, unfortunately, in our society, even with overwhelming evidence that will tell us we're wrong, many of us in human beings have a hard time going away from our dogma to accept that we might be wrong and to accept that and you can see this not just in dietary, but it's politics, it's religion, it's everything. But when we make the choice on what we want, and we, especially if it involves falling into a category of a group of people that we can form a tribe with, then we don't want to give up that tribe, that community, because so regardless of the facts that you present to me, you're wrong, because it takes me away from my group, my tribe.
Yeah. There's a whole interesting. First of all, I love this video. Look up on YouTube. Don't be a dick. And it's how to be persuasive, basically. So that's another one of the mantras I try to tell myself. I don't always succeed, but there's that. There's the idea that if we don't consider how we present evidence to people, we may in fact just harden their current position. So all of these things are things that we need to really be aware of, I would suggest, in our community, if we're going to get involved in something beyond the personal, right? The first thing is to support anyone who's making this change and give them whatever information they need to let them feel comfortable, right? To support them in what they're doing. So then there are these other things. You were talking about sort of this human nature, and again, there are people that can help us with that, with the words we choose to use, and all of those sorts of things, because it's like we were talking about with the distribution systems. We're talking about very complex subjects that we have over time we tend to just oversimplify them and come up with the answer. Okay. And part of my mission at in our training systems, as you get more and more trained, you tend to get deeper and deeper knowledge, but it's a narrower and narrower silo, right? So
Right.
you have a tremendous amount of information about this very narrow silo. And now as you get that way, you get further separated from these others. And we're trained in these disciplines to stay in our lane, right? And so now we're up against people that don't operate that way. And you can see this going right back to the dietary goals, dietary guidelines, and those conversations. So we need to get bridges built between these communities so that more people feel comfortable at least saying, well, I know this person over here in this discipline, and they've said, so therefore I'm comfortable with that. And so one of the things that has really been striking me over the last several months is it's one thing to talk about this in terms of a high income country like Canada or the US or Western Europe. We're seeing the same thing worldwide.
Right.
You know, every 7 seconds, someone in the world dies of diabetes. Okay. We've got rates of diabetes in countries that, again, people would assume not, because they assume obesity is the result of prosperity, right? They're just so as we look at this global situation, we have clear evidence of objective harm to human beings who are living in regions which, for whatever reason, they don't have enough animal source food in their diet. We have clear, sorry.
I was going to say, to illustrate your point, right here in the U.S., the Pima Indians, who, when they were on an animal source diet, were very fit, very healthy people. And then when they were put on reservation and the only store they can go shop to is the res store, they weren't allowed to hunt, weren't allowed to own weapons. They became obese because the only food they had access to was white flour, sugar.
Yeah.
You know.
So there's this, and again, this is objective evidence. I mean, we have people who have done work where they set up an intervention in a community where a pregnant woman gets 1 egg a day, and then while she's breastfeeding, she gets an egg a day in addition to whatever they're eating, right? It's that kind of achievable level of intervention. And they can measure cognitive and scholastic differences in her child, right?
Wow.
Relative, so 1 egg a day can make this difference. We've got a quarter of children globally under 5 years old, a quarter of them are stunted. And that's a lack of animal source food in their diet. And it's not just stature, it's also cognitive development. And they estimate that produces an 11% drag on GDP in sub-Saharan Africa, right? So we have this clear evidence of not enough. But then a lot of the papers that you read on this subject will mention, because they seemingly think they have to, but not too much. And I'm like, no, I want to get us in this community to understand there is, what is that based on? What would too much look like? Do you think it's heart disease? Do you think it's obesity? Because we have evidence it isn't, but you apparently are still operating under whatever. So that's one of the missions that I have, is to try to bring us together so that we can build bridges, so we can kill this zombie myth of too much from a nutritional and health perspective. And then if anyone wants to talk about environmental, then we've got other people we can bring in to say, well, maybe not there as well. So it's sort of this multi-front effort but basically, let's get more people aware that, again, the most impactful thing that they can do as individuals right now is to improve their own health.
Yeah, and I'm rereading right now Weston A. Price's Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, and from the time frame he was putting it in, he was saying, look, if these illnesses of, I forgot how he phrased it, but the illnesses of civilization continue to grow. And these are lifestyle illnesses of diabetes, of lower immune system, so you contract things and have symptomatic tuberculosis. And, if they continue to grow, we're going to end up bankrupting the country just based on health costs.
No, absolutely. I mean, already non-infectious diseases are the biggest killer globally, right? So
Yeah.
there's that. I think that the cost, direct and indirect, of obesity-related illness in the United States was estimated per one source at like $1.7 trillion, right? Which is like 9% of GDP in the United States. All of farm and ranch gate value in the United States is 1%.
We've kind of inverted the cube a little bit. You had a day in our history before the 1900s where the majority of our GDP as people would be spent on our food, and now,
yeah. Well,
it's
yeah, certainly at about the turn of the century, and I should look these up because I'm not real clear, but somewhere about that time, you had the majority of Americans being agrarian, and that the majority of household consumption was generated domestically. Right. So food, I mean, that gets to this whole question of what our ancestors used to eat. And they go and they look at food disappearance data. And what they don't recognize is that if the food never entered into commerce, it doesn't show up on food disappearance data. So when they say, oh, we used to eat more grains than we do now, it's only because grain was in commerce, and eggs and chicken and milk and dairy products and pork and others didn't get sold. They got produced on the farm and consumed locally, right?
Before refrigeration, they couldn't be sold.
Like that's another key point.
That's
Yep. That's another key point. These, again, all these key differences in technology, which aren't bad, but they produce these changes that then, okay, then what? So yeah, we have that, and it's not a bad thing that people moved off the farm from subsistence agriculture to the cities where they had different and some would argue better economic opportunities, right? I mean, that's not always a bad thing. Farming looks a lot different when you don't have to do it on a daily basis, and your life is not dependent on this harvest, right? So all of that. But again, back to I really think the best thing that we can be doing now is to find ways to communicate with our various communities that, this is not this, carbohydrate reduction, keto, call it whatever you want, is not a fad diet. It's well-founded. There's lots of literature behind it. And so if somebody said, well, how do I know? I mean, how do I measure? We know that weight is not a good metric for health, right? We know that LDL cholesterol and total cholesterol are essentially meaningless when it comes to heart risk. But how many people, that's all they know when they go to the doctor because they get their height and their weight. Hey, presto, you've got BMI. And they do the cholesterol and say, oh my God, look at you, you're about to die. How do we help them understand that, okay, ask for one more test, or if the doctor won't do it, pay for it yourself? And I mean, this is Ben Bickman's message, right? So, and it's ours as well. And then, well, so if I become aware that I'm insulin resistant, what could I do to change that? And then how would I know that that's happening? Right? So that kind of process, and focusing on the communication styles, the words we use, our behaviors, so that we don't get in the way of being a good pipe from these other sources, from the sources to the people that we're trying to give the information to, or help them get the information they need. And then when it comes to the, the ruminant animal agriculture questions and those sorts of things, then, okay, there's lots of information that I can plug people to. And how do I do that in a way that I don't get in the way of it with my personality or the things that I say, so that people can feel more confident about going to whatever store is available to them, accessible to them, buying whatever they can afford. That one of the best stories, and then we probably need to wrap, but and I think it happened no, it wasn't a Keto Fest, it was a Keto Con. I get confused. Somebody was saying that, okay, they're feeding 3 teenage boys, right? So there's a certain concession to cost. And so they're going and they're buying Spam. And certain communities think Spam is a food group all into itself, and that's fine. I got no problems with that. She says that she was frying some up for her children, but her mother was there. And so she felt like she had to apologize. And I'm sorry if you hear this story and it was your story, please send me an email so I have your name to attach to it if that's what you want. But she apologized to her mother for cooking Spam. Well, her mother says, oh no, I love Spam. Well, this was a revelation. She didn't know this about her mother. It turns out her mother had been in Berlin during the Berlin airlift. Oh, she was 15 years old. So put yourself, that's alone is a story. But so Spam was one of the things that was brought in on the airlift. And her mother said, no, Spam tastes like freedom. That was her line. Wow. And I said, you need to contact Hormel. And that needs to be their story. So there's all that kind of information. Oh, the other one to close out with, people have this idea of how ranchers treat their cattle. And I really think we need to find ways to have Keto Fest in North Dakota, on a ranch somewhere. We need to, and so that was an idea I was talking about before the world changed. But what this one physician who works in Montana told me this story, that he had this phone call from the emergency medicine department at his hospital saying, could you please come and talk sense to your patient? Right? Because he's had a heart attack and he's refusing admission. And so so he goes, he shows up. This is a guy, he's, I'll use the word ministered to him and his family for however many years he's been in the community. He's helped them all, right? And so, but the man is saying, Doc, look, I'll sign whatever, I need to sign to say it's not your fault, right? And I'll make the appointment to come in tomorrow for whatever treatment you say but cows come first. He had to go take care of the cows that night. And he'd come back the next day after he'd made arrangements for other people to take care of his cows or to do whatever he had to do so that they didn't have to, right? But the idea that human beings put their lives at risk keenly for the benefit of the animals that they feel they have the responsibility of caring for. Now, internalize that the next time you hear any of these other messages that come to you, right? So that we can go to the Piggly Wiggly, the Kroger, the Safeway, the restaurant, if we ever get to do that again, and get really tasty beef at a remarkable price for us to enjoy. And so let's wrap all that together with this health-saving message that you're promoting and others. And let's help America get healthy in many different ways.
Yeah. Yeah, I like to close out the show with just some real quick questions to answer, and it's just fun.
Me, quick answer? Are you kidding?
Well, I try to keep I try to keep these so that they can be more short form. Like the first question I always ask people is who are your 5 top health heroes?
Um, Gary Fetke and Belinda Fetke. Does that one or two?
We'll take it.
Tim Noakes, David Unwin, Michael and Mary Dan Eads.
Nice. And reason why I ask that question is because it gives people resources to go look these people up. So
Absolutely.
and then my other question I like to ask is, what are 3 foods you think everybody should just avoid, stay away from?
Oh, um, refined sugar in any form, refined white flour in any form, and vegetable. Sorry, see, I'm trying to train myself. They're not vegetable oils. There's no vegetable involved here. They're industrial oils.
Yeah.
I see no reason for the consumption of any of those. I realize I may be a bit of a zealot, but for me, those are my rules.
Well, honestly, that seems to be the general consensus almost every time I ask that question. Those are the 3 things that come up, and that's kind of my way of illustrating a point to my audience as well. So
Soy might be but you only gave me 3.
Yeah, there's a few more I could probably add. Like I try to keep these short.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. Oh, no worries.
Bad human, no donut.
What are 3 foods you think everybody should include in their diet? And I have a feeling I know which one you're going
to. Yeah. So we'll just go with the generic beef because all the cuts are wonderful. If again guided by sensitivity. So, for example, my wife has a sensitivity to dairy. Okay, it doesn't manifest as digestion; it manifests as congestion. And so, for her, it took a while to figure that out. So, no dairy of any kind for her. But I enjoy cheese. I just think it's lovely. I enjoy cream. I think that's lovely. But the all of the ruminants is one food group for me. Beef, lamb, goat, venison, all great. Pork is, the magical beast. And then, I like fish and shellfish. Eggs, I think we've talked about eggs repeatedly. I'm not a big fan of poultry. It tends to be too lean for me. If I'm going to eat poultry, it's going to be the dark meat because it has more fat, and I'm certainly going to have the skin with it. So those would probably, I think I basically covered the waterfront there.
I've become a big fan of duck.
Oh, yeah. And I suspect goose might be, maybe not as much as duck, but certainly different than modern chicken. Let's leave it that way.
And so that was the 3. And so what is one of the biggest dietary myths that you want to dispel, get rid of out of it?
There are so many. Well, I suppose that the one that I would start with is this idea that red meat consumption is a health hazard, that it in any way increases your risk of any kind of chronic disease, and that that's something we just need to start with. And then there's lots that come after that. But saturated fat, cholesterol, and red meat consumption are not things for people to be concerned about. Certainly once we've restricted the carbohydrates.
What's the biggest change to the food system you'd like to see come about?
I think, if possible, what we need to find a way to do is to ensure that more of the food dollar ends up with the producer than with the middle people, the processors, the marketers. That we really do face a problem in the United States where Producers are tremendously challenged with making a decent living because of the cost of production versus the value of the product that they produce.
Awesome. And the last thing is, if people want to contact you, if they want to find you, see where you're speaking next, you might be doing some of those digital conferences that are coming up. How do they find you?
Yeah, so tomorrow, as we record this, starts Low Carb USA San Diego, and I'll be giving my When is Protein Not Protein talk, I think Saturday morning there. You can find me on YouTube, Peter Ballerstedt. You can email me at peter.ballerstedt@gmail.com. I'm on social media, Facebook. I have a page called Grass-Based Health. I also, I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Grass-Based, one word.
Awesome. And we're going to go ahead and close out the show today, everybody. And I want to thank you so much for having you come onto the show and being one of our first early interviewees to be here. And it's really awesome that I've had you and Gary Taubes and some of my heroes on there, as well as like Michael Rutherford. So it's really cool, man. I appreciate it.
I'm happy to do it. Thank you for the invitation. It's an honor. Best of luck, Yogi, as you go forward with this. And if you need some introductions to some of my other tribe members, I'm happy to do it.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate it. I probably will. I might hit you up on that. All right. I'm going to go ahead and press the button.
Thank you for joining us on the Fatty Joe Show. Be sure to leave a comment and subscribe. It helps the show reach more people. To support the show, as well as Carrie Brown and Yogi's work on the blog, keto recipe development, masterclasses, and to gain access to private Facebook groups and other awards, go to patreon.com/thefattyjoeshow or patreon.com/Carrie Brown. Also, check out our Carrie Brown and Yogi Parker YouTube channel for video versions of the Fatty Joe Show, recipe videos, and more. Join our awesome community on the Facebook group, The Keto Kitchen with Carrie Brown and Yogi Parker, and check out our carriebrown.com website for recipes, blog posts, discounts, cookbooks, masterclasses, and other great stuff.